environment which can help them achieve their goals. Second, maintain the excellence and high standard performance leading to the attainment of both professional and academic goals. Third is work with the different sectors of the community college and to build harmonious relationships. Fourth is recognize and support the students' diverse abilities through creating a learning institution that gives importance on values and goals. Fifth is foster enthusiasm and independence among learners striving for holistic growth.
Muted ka, Day.
Muted gyapon.
Okay na. Blando. Okay.
6. Ibalik pa rin ako sa start.
No. Number 6 na.
Okay. 6 is enhance traditional instruction by incorporating technology with it to keep pace with the advancement of technology. 7th is uplift the educational, social, and economical status of the constituents of the college as well as neighboring communities. Next. Hello. Okay. Okay. Ano man ni? Okay. Meaning of pure obligation. A pure obligation is one of which is not subject to any condition and no specific date is mentioned for its fulfillment and is therefore immediate demandable. Example, D obliged to pay C 10,000 pesos. The obligation is immediately demandable if there is no condition and no date is mentioned for its fulfillment. Of course, if the loan has just been contracted by D, a period must have been intended by the parties for performance, but the duration thereof will depend upon the nature of the obligation and the circumstances. A distinction must be made between the immediate demandability of a pure obligation and its fulfillment by an obligor who may be granted by the court as a reasonable period for performance. The period remains pure when there is such period is fixed by the court. Meaning of conditional obligation. A conditional obligation is one whose consequences are subject in one way or another to the fulfillment of a condition. Meaning of condition. Condition is a future and uncertain event upon the happenings of which the effectivity or extinguishment of an obligation or rights is subject to it depends. Two characteristics of condition, future and uncertain. In order to constitute an event, a condition, it is not enough that it be future. It must be also uncertain. The first paragraph of the article 1179 obviously uses the disjunctive or between future and uncertain to distinguish pure obligation from both the conditional obligation and one with a period. B, that as it may the word or should be and. Second is past but unknown. A condition may refer to a past event unknown to the parties. It refers to a future event, but its very occurrence and the time of such occurrence must be uncertain. Otherwise, it is not a condition. Two principal kinds of condition. One is suspensive condition or condition precedent or condition at antecedent. Or one, the fulfillment of which will give rise to an obligation or right. In other words, the demand ability of the obligation is suspended until the happening of a future and uncertain event which constitutes the condition. A. Actually, the birth, perfection, or effectivity of the contrast subject to a condition can take place only if and when the condition happens or is fulfilled. If the suspensive condition does not take place, the parties would stand as if the, the conditional obligation have never existed. B. It must appear that the performance of an act or the happenings of an event was intended by the parties as a suspensive condition. Otherwise, its non-fulfillment will not prevent the Article 1179 perfection of a contract. C. There can be no rescission of an obligation that is still not existent. The suspensive condition does not having been fulfilled. Resolutory condition or condition subsequent, or the fulfillment of which will extinguish an obligation or right already existing. Lulu. Huh? Okay. Next is distinction between suspensive and resolutory condition. The difference between the two conditions is very clear. Both bear an influence on the existence of the obligation, but in diametrically opposed manner. One, if the suspensive condition is fulfilled, the obligation arises, while if it is in the resolutory condition that is fulfilled, the obligation is extinguished. Second, if the first does not take place, the tie of the law or the juridical or legal tie does not appear, while if it is in the other, the tie of the law is consolidated. And third, until the first takes place, the existence of the obligation is a mere hope, while in the second, its effects flow, but over it hovers the possibility of termination. So note in the distinction between suspensive and resolutory, a distinction must be made between a condition imposed on the perfection of a contract and that is imposed on the performance of an obligation. Failure to comply with the first condition results in the failure of a contract, while failure to comply with the second condition that the seller shall eject the squatters and the property sold with a certain period only gives the other party the option either to refuse to proceed with the sale or to waive the condition. When obligation is demandable at once. An obligation is demandable at once. Number one is when it is pure. Again, pure obligation is one of which is not subject to any condition and no specific date is mentioned for its fulfillment and is therefore immediately demandable. Second is when the subject is when it is subject to a resolutory condition. Resolutory condition again is or condition subsequent or the fulfillment of which will extinguish an obligation or right already existing. Third is when the subject when it is subject to a resolutory period. Past event unknown to the parties. A condition really refers only to an uncertain and future event. A past event cannot be said to be a condition, since the demandability of an obligation subject to a condition depends upon whether the event will happen or will not happen. What is really contemplated by the law is the knowledge to be acquired in the future of a past event which at the moment is unknown to the parties interested. For it's only in that sense that the event can be deemed uncertain. This knowledge determines whether the obligation will arise or not. Example, S is the owner of a parcel of land which had been claimed by X. Last week, the Supreme Court has rendered a final decision upholding with the right of S. However, S has not yet received the notice that he had won the case. Now, S obliged himself to sell the land to B for a definite price. Should he win the case against X? Under the facts, S would be bound to sell the land to B upon receipt of the notice that he had won the case against X. That's all for Article 1179. Thank you and God bless.
Okay, so before I will give the sentences to Giuliani, can we proceed first to 1180? Is the reporter for Article 1180 around? Karon Hanelu, are you here? How
Wait sa,
about,
Doc. Hinay daw kayo yan. Signal, Doc.
can she send the file to you, Dai, Kate?
Ako i-try og ingon, Doc.
I think I was mentioning last time that you need not to make a video on it because this is a live reporting, right? So if
Yes, Doc. Present. Kuan, yeah, Doc. PowerPoint. Then why audio? Kanang siya, mo report, Doc ba?
good. So if dili siya kasulod, just send the file to you, Kate.
Okay, okay, Doc.
Okay, so while waiting for the article 1180, just poke me dai ha, kay I'll just check the messenger if you already have it. So I'll go back na lang giving some discussion to the report of article 1179.
Okay, Doc. Okay, Doc.
So article 1179 talks about or section 1 in our next topic, which is after our midterms, is pure unconditional obligations. Remember that in your subject, we're talking about obligation. So again, when we talk about obligation, there should be an obligor and an obligee. So just give you a refresh, okay? Now, Article 1179 talks about everybody or every obligation whose performance does not depend upon a future or uncertain event or upon a past event unknown to the parties is demandable at once. Every obligation which contain a resolutory condition shall also be demandable without prejudice to the effects of the happening of the event. Okay? So the reporter talks about meaning of pure obligation. It means one which is not subject to any condition and no specific date is mentioned for its fulfillment and is therefore immediately demandable. So if the date as to when the obligor will pay or will deliver, okay, we have two words here, pay and deliver. It doesn't mean that deliver na kay ihatod, okay? So it means to say that the obligation should be delivered, no, or will be given to the obligee, okay? So if the date as to when the obligor will deliver the obligation is not mentioned, it means to say that it is immediately demandable. Always remember that. And that is for pure obligation. So example was also mentioned. D obliges himself to pay C 1,000 pesos. Again, D obliges himself to pay C 1,000 pesos. The obligation is immediately demandable because there is no condition and no date is mentioned for its fulfillment. So as soon as possible, ni-oblige mo siya siyang kaugalingon nga mabayaran niya si C. So dapat asap na siya iyang ihatag ang iyahang bayro nun, no, nga 1,000 pesos. So of course, if the loan has just been contracted by D, a period must have been intended by the parties for performance, but the duration therefore will depend upon the nature of the obligation and the circumstances. So depende na sa obligation, no? Sample, kung makautang siya dako kaayo, dili po na siya dayon immediately demandable, no? Number 2, D binds himself to pay C 1,000 pesos upon demand of C. The obligation is immediately due and demandable. So it means to say that the date has not been mentioned, but it is mentioned here that upon demand of the obligee. So depende sa obligee kung kanus-an niya kuhaon, it means to say that kung kanusa panilngon, example, if Kate Lorenzana borrows or owes Giuliani 1,000 pesos. There is no date mentioned as to when Kate will pay the 1,000 pesos. But it depends on when Giuliani will demand the 1,000 pesos from Kate. So Giuliani or Lorenzana will be forced to give or deliver the obligation which she owes to Giuliani because it depends upon when Giuliani will get it. That is in the pure obligation. Let's proceed to conditional obligation. So when we talk about conditional obligation, it is one whose consequences are subject in one way or another to the fulfillment of the condition. So let's understand first what's the meaning of condition. So condition is a future and uncertain event. Okay? Condition, it means to say that there is somehow like uncertain events upon the happening of which the acquisition or extinguishment of an obligation subject to it depends. It means to say, guys, that when we talk about condition of a certain obligation, this could help the obligation be extinguished. So mingon gitag extinguish, no, because of course this is a fresh or new word to us. When we talk about extinguished, meaning to say quits na. So, naay mga condition sa imong obligation nga ma-quits ang imong obligation, meaning to say mawala na siya, ma-extinguish siya, okay? Now, characteristics of a condition which we are referring to is number 1, future and uncertain. So, in order to constitute an event as a condition, it is not enough that it be future, it must also be uncertain, okay? So, di po nato matawag nga condition kung dili siya uncertain, okay? Kung certain siya, dili na condition kung certain. It means to say ang element when we talk about condition, kung di lang siya sure, no? Example, kung naay mabagyuhan, palatan mabagyo o niya mao ni mahitabo, so uncertain na siya kay di man ta ka sure kung mabagyo bagyod, okay? So the first paragraph of 1179 obviously uses the disjunctive word between future and uncertain to distinguish pure obligation and both conditional obligations and one with a period. Be as it may, the word or should be and. Ang pasabot ani guys, kung yung tag pure obligation, is distinguished nato sa conditional obligation. Ang pure obligation, walay gisulti nga date as to when kuhaon sa obligee ang ang obligation or when niya i-deliver sa obligor, pero immediately demandable, especially upon the demand of the obligee. Pero mingon gikag conditional obligation, there has a condition which is uncertain, and we are talking about future. So kung yung kag future gyud uncertain, dili man gyud ta sure ana, correct? So number 2, another characteristic of condition is past but unknown. A condition may refer to a past event unknown to the parties. If it refers to a future event, both its very occurrence and the time of such occurrence must be uncertain. Otherwise, it is not a condition. So, past but unknown siya, no? Nahitabo na pero unknown. So, and the condition must not also be impossible. So, always remember that. Now, there are 2 kinds of condition, principal, suspensive and resolutory. Sayon ra kayo ning suspensive. Suspensive condition, condition precedent or condition antecedent, or one the fulfillment of which will give rise to an obligation. So ako lang tagaan din mo example, no, kay wala ni na mention ning example dito. I will sell you the land if it is adjudicated to me in the division of my deceased father's estate. My obligation is demandable only after the condition is fulfilled. So my becoming the owner of the land, in the meantime, I am not liable to you. So example, yun ko nga, ibaligya na ko ang yuta, na ako ibaligya ni mga yuta if mabahina na ko sa akong papa, sa akong bahin. So it means to say na maghuwat pa siya nga mamatay ang iyang papa, or before mamatay iyang papa, gibahin-bahin na ang yuta nila, nga mga anak, for example. Now, ug dili pa na mahitabo ang gibahin-bahin ang yuta sa iyang papa nilang mga anak, or wala pa siya namatay, no? It means to say na dili pa niya ma-deliver ang iyang obligation nga mabaligya ang yuta. It's because wala pa man nahitabo. Do you get the point? So wala pa man nahitabo ang pagbahin sa iyang deceased father estate. Wala pa man mahitabo. So it means to say that is suspensive condition. Part of the condition, principally suspensive condition. I hope you get the point. Number 2, when we talk about resolutory condition, the fulfillment of which will extinguish an obligation already existing. So meaning to say, kuan na siya kanang ma-extinguish na siya, no? D, in payment of his debt to C, bind himself to give 3,000 pesos monthly allowance until C graduates from college. Example, ako ni tarongon, si Alfredo, mubayad siya ni Anami Pipito og 3,000 pesos monthly kung mo-graduate na si Apple sa college. It means to say na di pa siya mubayad kung si Apple di pa ka-graduate. So there is a condition, and that is future. That is resolutory, no? Now, this obligation is demandable now, but it shall be extinguished or terminated upon the happening of the resolutory condition since graduating from college. So, ma-extinguish po lang yung obligation, guys, kung ni-graduate na ang usa sa college, no? Extinguish meaning to say, mawala na. Okay? So, that's what we called as conditional obligation. Again, that is suspensive and resolutory. Always remember, when we talk about suspensive, kung wala pa mahitabo ang certain condition, di pa niya ma-deliver ang obligation. Again, ang example ani, akong ibaligya nimo ang yuta, kung mabahinan ako or mabayran na ang father estate. So kani siyang father estate, meaning to say, kung mabayran na niya ang tanan nga taxes sa iyang ari-arian. So magbahin-bahin nami, mahuman nagbayad ang estate. So ako lang nimong ibaligya kung mabahinan ako. That's resolutory. No. Suspensive. O mayong kag resolutory, always remember the clue, there should be an extinguishment of the obligation. Meaning to say, na possibility nga ma-extinguish ang imong utang depending on the condition. Okay? So, unsa may kalahian aning suspensive o resolutory, both bear an influence on the existence of the obligation but in diametrically opposed manner. If the suspensive condition is fulfilled, the obligation arises. Okay? So kung mahuman na bayad ang estate, mahatag, mawaligyan na niya ang yuta. While if it is resolutory, the obligation is extinguished. Okay? So ana na siya guys. Ayaw na kayo ng clue na. If the first does not take place, the tie of the law does not appear. So kung wala pa mahitabo ang condition sa suspensive, wala pa yung obligation na. In the resolutory, the tie of the law is consolidated. No? So that's why there is extinguishment. So when obligation is demandable at once, when it is pure, subject to resolutory condition, and when it is subject to resolutory period. O sige? So that is all about Article 1179. Talks about pure and conditional obligation. Pure, demandable at once, there is no date mentioned, but upon the demand of the obligee. When we talk about conditional obligation, there are two principal kinds. These are suspensive and resolutory. Suspensive, kung wala pa mahitabo ang condition, the obligation will not be delivered. So resolutory, there should be extinguishment of or consolidated condition of the obligation. Okay? So let's proceed to the Article 1180. Nana?
Good
Nana,
morning, Doc.
Sige. So ako ra day ni play ani. Nana ang reporter.
Naara, Doc. Lagay
sige.
ko, Doc, munang gihatag ran ako ni Kate.
Sige. So ako na lang play. Pero ikay report.
Yes, Doc. Naara na siya yung audio, Doc. In case nga magputol-putol ko ba.
Sige. Ako na lang ni, asa to? Local. It's download. Wala man. Download. Article 1180. Do you have any question with Article 1179? Sige.
Doc.
Yes. PowerPoint. Okay, share screen. Dili mo ko na ako ma-slideshow. Wala di man siya ma-play dito sa ako ang end. Media unavailable daw.
Pwede rin sa itabiran ako, Doc.
Sige,
Kasi pilit ko mag-log.
Ana na lang ha, kadili po na ko slideshow from the beginning. Hala. Okay.
Sige, Doc. So, good morning, everyone. I am Hanilo Makaran, and I'm going to tackle about Article 1180. So, with the vision of
Okay na nilaga. Okay.
So, Article 1180. When the debtor binds himself to pay, when his means permit him to do so, the obligation shall be deemed to be one with a period subject to the provisions of Article 1197. So, in this article, the debtor ang nangutang kay gitagaan og chance nga mobayad sa iyang utang sa bisag unsa nga pamaagi. Ug tagaan sa siya permission sa iyang yutangan. Pero dapat na duration period kung until when niya bayaran ang iyang utang. Next, Doc. So where duration of period depends upon the will of debtor. So a period is a future and a certain event upon the arrival of which the obligation subject to it either arises or extinguished. Next, Doc. So number 1, the debtor promises to pay when his means permit to do so. The obligation shall be deemed to be one with the period. In this case, what depends upon the debtor's will is not whether he should pay or not, for indeed he binds himself to pay. What is left only to his will is the duration of the period. If the debtor and the creditor cannot agree as to the specific time for payment, the court shall fix the same on the application of either party from Article 1197. So in this part, the debtor is obliged to pay within a period of time. If ang debtor and creditor is dili magkasinabot sa specific time for payment, aray na ma-apply ang Article 1197 nga i-fix sa court. Next, Doc. Next, Doc.
Kani other cases na ako nakita under dahil sakto na ni. Number 2, other cases. Si Kate nawala. Okay, so ako na yung pala yun. Other cases as when the debtor binds himself to pay. Little by little, pwede. So, ang kaning cases gipasabot dere, these are the cases applicable to Article 1180, guys. Okay, please screenshot kay this could be, I will give you this as research, no? So, i-research ninyo nga kaso as soon as possible, then from time to time, as soon as I have the money, no? So, at the time I have the money. So, these are the mga katarungan of the debtor.
Nawala ko.
Yeah, ako na lang ipadayon dahil. These are the mga katarungan of the debtor to the obligee or the creditor, no? Sige dahil, continue. Okay na ka, Day? Sige.
Wala dyan ko, Doc.
Sige, ako rin padayon. In partial payments, no? So, maghatag siya partial payment. When I am in a position to pay, no, then obligation in the period are discussed in the next section. Okay. So, short na kayo ang Article 110. No? So, i-screenshot ni siya nga mga cases kay one of your research project sa finals is to research all these, no? Para di kayo mo madugayan, pagpili lang mong duha ka case, okay? Pagpili lang mong duha ka case diha, unya make a digest. Research, case digest. Kung yung kay kag digest, murag summary. Pero always remember, in your summary, you need to give the facts. So, unsa may facts sa kaso. Then, you need to give the issue. Okay? Mo na inyong ibutang dito ha, sa inyong digest ha. Ang facts, unsa may facts sa kaso, unsa may example ng facts. Example, nahitabong patay sa, sige, ako na lang example, ako ang parent. So, my father committed parricide. So, kung yung tag-parricide, that's a case for one family member murder or killed another family member. That's a parricide. So, muta na ang korte. Unsa may facts ani? So, ang facts, mingon kag September 29, 1999, it was around 6 p.m. when Mario and Vicenta have arguments. Then, muna siya facts, no? Then, pag humag nilag away, gipusil si Kuan, ana. So, muna facts. Ang issue, unsa may issue ani? Of course, ang issue ani is all about binding the debtor to pay his means or dapat magsinabtanay sila sa creditor. So Article 1180 ang more of the issue of these cases, no? Then uman sa issue, rulings. Unsa may rulings of the court, no? Then pagkahuman, conclusion. Unsa may conclusion sa korte. Okay? So pagpili lang mong duha diha. No, I will just give to your class middle as to when is the deadline. Again, for Article 1180, you have to make a case digest of only 2 cases para dili kayo lisod. 2 cases lang, no? And I know guys nga mangupya raman mo. I know mangupya raman gid mo pero basahan lang po yung gikopya. This is for your own good, no? Dili ni para sa kuha, no? Basahan lang. At least na kay idea how to make a case digest. No? So, I am I will give you source, no? Kung sa internet mo magkuha, adtong pagkuha sa lawfil.com. Lawfil, fil nga Philippines, no? Kay kuha na siya diha, nindot na siya diha nga mga cases. Okay? So, that's Article 1180. So, na-mention naman siguro ganyan sa reporter very nicely, no? Nga, dapat magkasabot ang debtor o ang creditor as to pagbayad sa ihang utang depende sa mga conditions, pero kung dili sila magkasinabot, that's the time that state of law applies, meaning to say mangadto na sila sa korte. Okay, this is Article 1180. So pwede ra gid na nga muhangyo ka sa imong utang, wala dyan na problema sa creditor. So dili day na maayo guys nga kung makautang ta i-block na to ang atong giutangan. Dili po na maayo nga kung makautang ta likay ta sa atong utang. So dili na maayo. Instead, talk to the creditor. Hangyua ang creditor as to unsaon ninyo ang utang, no? So mo na siya case nato dire. Okay? Let's proceed to Article 1180. 1181. Nana dire ang reporter?
Yes, Doc.
Sige, sige dahil. Share screen na lang.
Makita na, Doc.
Dili lang ga. Naka-share screen na ka?
Wait sa Doc, wait sa Doc.
And diretso na lang sa topic dahil ayaw na mission vision dahil.
Okay, Doc.
Dahil ganihan naman ang tackle. Okay. Okay. Your screen is now visible. Nakita lang to kanina. Okay, okay. Go ahead.
Balan? Asa mo ka? Salida ka?
Si Sheila May ang Conron, reporter. Hindi na siya madungog.
Maneha, Doc.
Maniha, sige dahil. Continue dahil. Nawala?
Ay, sorry, what did tingog?
Wala lang ga. Ikuan na lang. Tabi na lang.
Sige, Doc, balik ko na ako sa sinugdanan. Article 1181. In conditional obligations, the acquisition of rights as well as the extinguishment or loss of those already acquired shall depend upon the happening of the event which constitutes the condition. Effects of happening of condition. This article reiterates the distinction between a suspensive or antecedent condition and a resolutory or subsequent condition. 1. Acquisition of rights. In obligations subject to a suspensive condition, The acquisition of rights by the creditor depends upon the happening of the event which constitutes the condition. Example, T, testator in his last will and testament gave some property to H, provided T would die within 2 years. So, in this case, H would acquire a right to the land only upon the happening of the suspensive condition. The death of T within 2 years, if there is no length of time within which the death must take place, the obligation is one with a period. If T died after 2 years, the situation would be the same as if no one provision was made by T in his will in favor of H. Loss of rights already acquired. In obligation subject as resolutory condition, the happening of the event which constitutes the condition produces the extinguishment or loss of rights already acquired. So I have here an example. X binds himself to support Y until Y graduates from college. So here, the right already acquired by Y. The right to receive support shall be extinguished or lost once the condition is fulfilled. So there are two effects of classifications of condition: the acquisition of rights and the extinguishment or loss of those already acquired. So acquisition of rights, that means suspensive condition, and the extinguishment or loss of those already acquired refers to resolutory condition. So suspensive condition is the fulfillment of the event will give rise to an obligation, while resolutory condition is the fulfillment of the event will extinguish an obligation already existed. Sumaurat to siya, Doc. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dai. So Article 1181, is very short. So somehow like it is only murag lang reiterate ang Article 1179 more on conditional obligation, no? So Article 1181, in conditional obligation, the acquisition of rights as well as the extinguishment or loss of those already acquired shall depend upon the happening of the event which constitutes to the condition. So in Article 1181, it talks about the acquisition of rights to the creditor. It means like na may uban, kuhaon na lang si creditor ang iyang ari-arian kung wala gid siya ikabayad, no? As what you've noticed, kuhaon na lang na sa creditor ang iyang ari-arian, pero in this case naay condition nga makuha lang na siya nimo kung katong nga condition mahitabo to siya. So ang example nga gikuan dire, T, testator in his last will and testament give some property to H, heir. Yung ikang heir manununod, no? Kani si H manununod ni T. Okay? Nag-gets yung point? So si T in his last will and testament, iyang gi-mention dito nga muhatag siya property to H as manununod niya provided that the testator T would die within 2 years. So what do you think will happen if the T, the testator, will not die within 2 years? So may mahitabo. So dili niya ma-acquire ang property. Do you get the point? So mao na siya ang nusod na diri ang ginatawag og suspensive condition. Nga kung dili mahitabo ang kaning pagkamatay ni T within 2 years, dili niya mahatagan pa og property si H as iyahang heir or manununod, no? So H would acquire a right to the land only upon the happening of the suspensive condition. Unsa may suspensive condition diri? Kung mamatay si T within 2 years. So if there is no length of time within the death of T must takes place, the obligation is one with a period. If T died after 2 years, the situation would be the same as if no provision was made by T in his will in favor of H. So meaning to say guys, kung dili mahitabo nga mamatay si T within 2 years, as if there is no provision. Meaning to say, as if walay kasabutan nga nahitabo. Kaya wa man siya namatay within 2 years. Nagets ninyo ang suspensive condition? So, the surrender of the sweepstakes ticket is a condition precedent to the payment of the prize. So, it means to say na kung wala ka nakahatag og kuan, nakahatag og ka ng ticket sa sweepstakes, as if wala ka nakadaog ato. Di ka kaingon nga nakadaog ka, kaya wa man ka nakahatag sa ticket, no? So, that's another suspensive condition. So, loss of rights already acquired. So, pasabot ani. In obligation subject to a resolutory condition, the happening of the event which constitutes the condition produces the extinguishment or loss of the rights already acquired. It means to say na kung ang obligation ko no subject to a resolutory condition, katong resolutory maumantong second kind of conditional obligation nga naghisgot og extinguishment. Kung mayroon kang extinguishment, quits, no? Wala na ang obligation. So, example, X binds himself to support Y until Y graduates from college. So here, the right already acquired by Y, actually, ang right na acquired na ni Y kay ngano man gisuportahan man siya sa college na baya. So after siya mo graduate sa college, alangan man sag si X mo padayon pa siya support ni Y nga nag-graduate naman. So extinguish na ang iyahang obligation diyang dapita pero na-acquire na ni Y. So kay ngano na-acquire man, gisuportaran man siya within the period nga nag-college siya pero ma-extinguish lang siya upon the graduation of the Y. So nag-gets na nimo? Already acquired niya kay every year, 4 years siya sa college, nag-support man si X ni Y. Unya, ma-extinguish lang na siya kung graduate na si Y sa college. I hope you get that point. So, another example. Si S, gibaligya niya to B ang parcel sa iyang land. Subject to S right of repurchase. So, minito sinay condition nga, pwede niya pod paliton og balik. Again, si S iyang gibaligya ang iyang parcel to B sa iyang land. Pero pwede na siya right diha nga iyang balikon og palit. The ownership already acquired by B. So nakuha na ni B kay gibaligya man ni sold meaning to say gibaligya naman ni S ang parcel ni B. Under the contract shall be extinguished or lost should S exercise his right to repurchase. So nakuha na niya ang parcel sa yuta kay gibaligya man ni S. Pero ma-extinguish na siya kung balikon og palit ni S ang parcel sa yuta. Another example, a lease contract expressly stipulates that R, ang ni Abang, may terminate the lease in case his children shall need the leased premises. Here, the happening of the condition depends upon the will of the third person, R's children. Kung pasabot. Sample, gaabang mo karon. So, na-acquire na ninyo ang property, no? Kay kamo na may gaabang. Pero nasa condition diha nga kung gamiton na sa tag-iya ang inyong giabangan, automatic kuhaon gyud niya dayon. So that's resolutory condition. Loss of rights already acquired. So mawala ang rights nga imuhang na acquire, no? Depending on the condition. So as atong example ko kung balikon, na-acquire na ni estudyante ang support ni X. Pero ma-extinguish na siya kung mo-graduate na siya. Second, gibaligya ni S ang parcel sa yuta ni B. So na-acquire na ni B ang yuta. Pero ma-extinguish na siya kung paliton og balik ni S ang iyang parcel. Kaya nasa sa yes contract. Sunod, nag-abang ta sa balay. So na-acquire na nato kay nag-abang naman ta, naanata didto, nagprobitsar naman ta, no? Naggamit na ta sa place or property. Pero napod sa condition kay gaabang raman ta, we do not own really the lot or the property or the house. The moment gamito na ang property or place, then kuhaon na pagbalik sa tag-iya. Okay? So that is conditions. Those are the conditions, no, depending sa kuan. So I think Maba ra po ng Article 1182. Is the reporter around?
Yes, Doc.
Sige, continue na ko sa Article 1182.
Okay, Doc.
Share screen lang diha lang ga.
Makita na siya, Doc.
Yes. Clear.
Mo-proceed ko sa article, Doc. Naraman siya isang
Yeah.
daan,
Go
Doc.
ahead. Go ahead. I-click na yung more. Okay. Istorya day ha kay di ba may kadungog og kuan. Voice.
I-report pa na ko, Doc. Agad,
Yes,
Doc.
yes. I-report na lang gid day. Who is this report ni Rosa?
Mapa, Doc.
Okay. Sige, i-click lang to day ang article. Diretso na lang. Ayun na lang vision.
Wait lang sa Doc. Wait lang sa Doc. Article 1182. When the fulfillment of the condition depends upon the sole will of the debtor, the conditional obligation shall be void. If it depends upon chance or upon the will of the third person, the obligation shall take effect in conformity with the provision of this Code 1115. Classifications of conditions. Condition may be classified as follows. First, as to effect. A. Suspension suspensive. Suspensive is the happening of which gives rise to the obligation, and B, resolutory, the happenings of which extinguishes the obligations. Mao na ni katong kuan sa article ganina nag-explain ni Doc. So, 2, as to form. A, express. The condition is clearly stated, and B, implied. The condition is merely inferred. 3, as to possibility. A, possible. The possible is the condition is capable of fulfillment legally and physically, while B is the impossible. The condition is not capable of fulfillment legally or physically. As the fourth one is as the cause or origin. A, potestative. Potestative is the condition depends upon the will of one of the contracting parties, while B is the casual condition depends upon chance or upon the will of the third person, and C is the mixed condition depends partly upon chance and partly upon the will of the third person. The fifth one is as to mode. A, positive. Positive is a condition consists in the performance of an act, and B is negative. The condition consists in the omissions of an act. The sixth one is as to number. A, conjunctive. Conjunctive is when there are several conditions and all must be fulfilled, and B, disjunctive when there are several conditions and only one of some of them must be fulfilled. While the last one is as to divisibility. A, divisible. Divisible is the condition is susceptible of partial performance, and B is indivisible. Indivisible is the condition is not susceptible of partial performance. While going to proceed the potestative condition. Potestative condition is a potestas means comes from the root word potestas, which means authority and power, and it is a condition suspensive in nature and which depends upon the sole will of one of the contracting parties is known as potestative condition. Where can we say suspensive conditions upon the will of the debtor? First is conditional obligation void. Conditional obligation void where the potestative conditions depend solely upon the will of the debtor. The conditional obligation shall be void because its validity and compliance is left to the will of the debtor, referring from Article 1308, and it cannot therefore be legally demanded. In order not to be liable, the debtor will not just fulfill the condition. There is no burden on the debtor and consequently no judiciality is created, referring from Article 1156. The examples are I will pay you if I want. Second one is I will pay you after I receive a loan from a bank. The third one is I will pay you after I recover what X owes. Number 4 is I will pay you after I harvested fish. The fifth one is I will pay you upon the sale of the house in which I live. The sixth one is I will pay you the price of the forest concessions you sold me upon my operation on the same. The last one is I will continue to lease your property prior as long as need the premises and pay the rent. In all the above cases, both the condition and obligations are void, which means not valid ang ilang mga conditions and obligations. The conditions in example number 2 to 6 are tantamount to a debtor telling the creditor that he would pay his obligation when and if he wants. So, ang makita nimo ato sa katong mga example, ang debtor ang nagbuot kung kanusa siya mobayad. While example number 7, the continuance, effectively, and fulfillment of the lease contract depends solely upon the uncontrolled will of the lease. So ang controlled sa kuan kay katong gi prindahan, so ang gaprinda ra ang makakuan kung kanus-a siya, kanus-a niya kanang kwaon ang iyang giprinda. So the second one is the only the condition void. If the obligation is a pre-existing one and therefore does not defense for its existence upon the fulfillment by the debtor for the potestative condition, only the condition is void, leaving unaffected the obligation itself. Here the condition is imposed not on the birth of the obligation but on its fulfillment. Example, D borrowed 10,000 pesos from C payable within 2 months. Subsequently, D promised to pay C after D sells his car, to which C agreed. In this case, only the condition is void but not the pre-existing obligation of D to pay C. So, ang void ra ani kay ang condition, ang dili valid, ang condition ra ni D na mobayad ra siya kung mabalikya na ang iyahang kotse within 2 months. Nya ang ga-exist ra ani kay ang obligation ni D na kailangan jud niyang bayaran si C. Ika ni May. Wait. Where suspensive conditions depends upon will of the creditor. If the condition depends exclusively upon the will of the creditor, the obligation is valid. Example, I will pay you my indebtedness in your demand. The obligation does not become illusory. Normally, the creditor is interested in the fulfillment of the obligation because it is for his benefits. It is up to him whether he to enforce his right or not. Where resolutory condition depends upon will of the debtor. If the condition is resolutory in nature, like the right to repurchase in a sale which patio di retro, the obligation is valid although its fulfillment depends upon the sole will of the debtor. The fulfillment of the condition merely causes the extinguishment or loss of rights already acquired, referring from Article 1181 katong kuan kanina ni Doc gi-explain sa article na katong about sa land. The debtor is naturally interested in its fulfillment. So the position of the debtor when the condition is resolutory is exactly the same as that of the creditor when the condition is suspensive. Casual condition. If the suspensive condition depends upon chance or upon the will of a third person, the obligation subject to it is valid. Examples, where X building contractory alleged himself in favor of Y owner to repair at X expense any damages that may be caused to the building by any earthquake occurring within 10 years from the date of the completion of its constructions. 2. Where S binds himself to sell his land to S if he wins a case which is depending before the Supreme Court.
Mixed condition. The obligation is valid if the suspensive condition depends partly upon chance and partly upon the will of a third person. Example, where X building contractor obliged himself in favor of Y, owner to repair at X expense. Any damages to be building taking place after an earthquake if found by a panel of big structures that construction defects contributed in any way to the damage. Both conditions must take place in order that X obligation will arise. The decision of the panel or the third party must be accepted by X and Y as final unless it can be shown that it was incompetent to act in that capacity or was obviously biased favoring X of Y. Where suspensive conditions depends partly upon the will of the debtor. According to Manresa, the use of the word exclusive or non-sole makes it clear at conditional obligation whose fulfillment depends partly upon the will of the debtor and partly upon the will of a third person or upon chance are perfectly valid. It is believed, however, that its compliance with the obligation still depends upon that part of the condition whose fulfillment depends upon the will of the debtor. The obligation is void as it is within his power to comply or not to comply with the same. The situation is the same as if the condition depends entirely upon the will of the debtor. So, maora tong about sa Article 1182.
Okay, thank you so much. 1183. 1182, correct?
Yeah.
1182 ba ni? So Article 1182, guys, talks about when the fulfillment of the condition depends upon the sole will of the debtor, the conditional obligation shall be void. So, kung ang pagbuot ra sa debtor, kung kanus-an niya i-fulfill or i-deliver ang yung obligation to the creditor, then that is not anymore conditional obligation. Okay? Meaning to say, void, dili na siya conditional kay ang debtor may nagbuot, no? Sa iyang kung kanusa siya mobayad sa iyang obligation. So that's unsay namin may pasabot sa Article 1182, no? If it depends upon the chance or upon the will of the third person, the obligation shall take effect in conformity with the provisions of this code. Okay? So again, nagisgot man ta og resolutory o conditional ganiha. Unya, isa ka nalubat ko kadiyat lang. Ang pagkuan, ang pag-deliver or paghatag sa iyang obligation depends on the condition. So, mo ning Article 1183. Okay? So, na siya classification diri nga gihatag ang condition, no? As to effect, as to form, as to possibility, as to cause of or origin, as to mode, as to numbers, as to divisibility. So, that is for you to kuan na lang study later on, no? Sa mga gitawag o mga kuan niya, classifications of conditions. So, let's talk about potestative. So, a condition suspensive in nature and which depends upon the sole will of the contracting parties is known as potestative condition. So, makaingon ang kag kanang potestative na siya ha kung suspensive condition ang naa. So nakasabot naman mo sa suspensive condition kay ako namang i-discuss ganiya. Again, kung yung kag suspensive condition, kung dili pa mahitabo ang iyang gihatag na condition, it means to say na di pa niya ma-deliver ang iyang obligation. Ang akong gihatag nga example ganiha for the benefit of mga na-late nga mahatag lang niya ang iyahang property, no, sa iyang creditor. Kung mabahina na siya sa estate or sa mabahin na siya sa iyang papa kung mamatay within 2 years. Kung dili mamatay within 2 years, dili na niya mahatag ang property. That's suspensive in nature. Okay. Where suspensive condition depends upon the will of the debtor. So, muna siya example. Again, kung ang condition nagikan sa debtor, void ang condition. Kasabot mo? So, kung ang condition kung ang condition nagikan sa nangutang, void na siya, void. Dili pwede nga, dili na to na matawag nga suspensive condition kung ang condition gikan sa nangutang. Dapat sa creditor good na or gikan sa third person. So, sa may example po sa third person, akong ibalik ang example. Si A, gipaabangan niya ni B ang yang property. Ang third person ani karon, kung ang D, anak ni sa nagpa-lease or nagpaabang, gamiton niya ang property sa iyang papa. So siya third person ana. Okay? Karon, example aning conditional obligation void. I will pay if I want. Meaning to say, ang creditor na, I will pay you after I receive the loan from a bank. So siya nagbuot. I will pay you after I recover what X owes. Meaning to say, bara ni Alea si Alfredo, kung madawat na ni Alea, gikan ni Alcosiba, ang utang ni Alcosiba. So kung dili kabayad si Alcosiba ni Alea, di po niya mabayaran si Alfredo. So that's voidable conditional obligation. Okay? I will pay you upon the sale of the house. Mahal na kung balay, bayaran tikaw. O, voidable na. Or void. I will pay the price of the forest concession you sold me upon the operation of the same. I will continue to lease your property for as long as I need the premise and pay the rent. So, kung nabayad gyapon ko sa imong property, gamiton gyapon ako imong property, ako ra gyapon na siyang abangan. That's void. Okay? So only the condition void if the obligation is pre-existing one and therefore does not depend for its existence upon the fulfillment by the debtor of the potestative condition. So here the condition is imposed not on the birth of the obligation but on its fulfillment. Sample, D borrowed 10,000 from C, payable within 2 months. Subsequently, D promised to pay C after D sells his car, to which C agreed. So ni-agree po si ana nga condition ni D sayang nangutang, no? So si D na siya utang ni C nga 10,000 nga dapat bayaran after sa 2 ka bulan. Karon after 2 months kay niingon naman pud si D nga bayaran tikaw C kung mahalin na ni akong sakyanan. Bayaran ra gyud tikaw. Ni-agree pud si C, no? So in this case, the condition is void. Nga naman, siya may nagbuot. Ang nangutang man ay nagbuot kung ano sa siya mobayad nga dapat man unta to after 2 months. Na naman ta sila agreement nga after 2 months niya. After 2 months, naingon naman sa siya nga, sige, bayaran tikaw kung mahalin niya akong sakyanan. So, void na ang condition, ana, kay nagbuot naman si debtor. But the pre-existing obligation nga mobayad gyud si D ni C is naa pa siya. No? Wala ma-void. Na-void. So, na-void lang to nga conditions nga mubayad si kung mahalin yang si D kung mahalin yang sakyanan. So dili gid na void ang yang utang ni C. Okay? Ang uban wala. So next, where suspensive condition depends upon the will of the creditor. So karon ganiha will sa debtor siya nagbuot. Karon will na po ni sa creditor. If the condition depends exclusively upon the will of the creditor, the obligation is valid. So sayon kayo sabton. Ato lang sabton dayon ang article 1183. 1182 ba ni? 1182. So ang kaning article 1182, again, kung ang condition nagikan ni debtor void, no? Void na siya ang condition, ang obligation. Pero kung ang condition. Pero ang condition nagdepend sa creditor, ang obligation is valid. Okay? Now, example, I will pay you my indebtedness upon your demand. Ikaw lang magbuot, creditor, kung kanus ani mo kuhaon ni akong utang nimo. if the obligation does not become illusory, normally the creditors is interested in the fulfillment of the obligation because it is of his benefit. It is up to him whether to enforce his right or not. Sige? If the condition is resolutory in nature, like the right of the repurchase in a sale of sale with pacto directo retro, the obligation is valid, although its fulfillment depends upon the sole will of the debtor. So ibaligya na ako ni Nimo na lang, palit dala baligya na lang ni ako ang ay palit, bayad dala palit, no? Ang ako ang utang. So the fulfillment of the condition merely causes the extinguishment or loss of rights already acquired. So bisan pa tuod og na gibaligya niya sa creditor ang kuan, ang yang yuta, pero pwede niya paliton og balik, no? So resolutory na siya. The position of the debtor when the condition is resolutory is exactly the same as the creditor when the condition is suspensive. O, mo na siya. Casual condition na pod if the suspensive condition depends upon the chance or upon the will of the third person. So, casual na. Mixed condition, obligation is valid if suspensive condition depends partly upon the chance and partly upon the will of the third person. So, naanay involvement ang third person sa casual o sa mix, no? Always remember that. Pag abot sa casual o sa mix, naanay involvement ang third person. Okay? So, maura na dapat natong kuanon guys, remember sa Article 1182, there should ang condition kung gikan sa debtor, void ang obligation. Kung ang condition gikan sa creditor, valid ang obligation. So, ang ato lang hinumduman diri karon kung naay mga exams, depende sa mga form niya, no? Pero actually, ang ako lang nga point diri karon is for you to understand nga nagiday na cases nga mahitabo nga ang payer mo magbuot. So, ang rason nga ang payer magbuot kay depende man po na siya sa iyang capability, no? So karon ang creditor, wala siya mahimo ana. There are instances nga wala mahimo ang creditor, except to accept na lang gyud kung unsay isulti sa debtor, especially kung makita gyud sa creditor nga wala gyud siya kakayahan. Kay kung ikiha pa niya, magbayad naman siya filing fee ana. Unya, what if makadaog siya sa kiha? Nya, do you think mabayaran gid siya sa debtor? No, so mo na guys nga sometimes dili na lang mukiha ang creditor. Hulato na lang jud niya nga makabayad si debtor, no? So this class is very nice for me, no, kay kuan manas. Pero kita nga nakabalo sa balaod, kabalo gid unta ta nga sa naman ni siya na may nagbuot sa atong yang utang hinuon. Sometimes makaana beta nga unsa man ni nga ako man tay gapautang, ako pa may maikog maningil, no? Kay ang mga mangutang mao na mahinuoy dili hatag siyang obligation, magbuot pa. O sige, bayran na lagi tika basta mahalin ako mo ni. Kuan ni ana. So makabalo na ka nga in that case ang ni exist nga kuan obligation is conditional. And that conditional obligation is void kay nagbuot naman si debtor. So dapat si creditor gyud magbuot sa kay ako may nagpautang nimo, ako jud magbuot ano sa ani mo bayaran, ano sa kamo deliver sa obligation, no? So actually this topic talks about kuan guys kanang conditional and pure obligation. Ang pure obligation, kabalo naman mo sa pure obligation nga demandable gid siya. No, walay date o time giskutan pero demandable. Dayon immediately. Pero kung yung tag conditional obligation, daghan kay siya klase-klase pero nakafocus siya on suspensive and resolutory, no? So actually, just review, no? I will not give you any more the quiz this morning. Napa mo klase next ani?
Yes, no.
Okay. So I will not give you then ato nang humanon ang article 1183 until sa kung gihatag nga article 1192 sa next meeting, no? Tomorrow is Saturday. Do you have free time tomorrow? Para madali na to ni makahuman na dahil ang reporter sa next topic. Namoy free time wala dahil ko free time ugma kay I'll be going to the school. Next Monday na lang. And akong quiz ihatag na ko sa Lunes before sa next reporter. Would that be fine?
Yes, Doc.
Okay,
Yes, Doc.
online quiz na siya ha, online quiz na. So prepare lang mong data. Actually, kung globe mo, ang data nga kusog is go 140 unya. 7 days na dako lagig. Muna akong gamit pod. Go 140. Kung globe mo, kung smart, I don't have idea. So kay para madali-dali na to guys, kaya dagan-dagan pa bitag topics actually. No? So, thank you so much, reporters. Dili na lang kumuhatag sa quizzes. Do you have any questions first? Ang mga audience, na may questions sa reporters? Sige lang. Ayaw ka ulaw pangutana.
Wala ra, Doc. Sabdan ra, Doc.
Sabtan ra, Doc.
Okay, thank you. So, I will end the meeting and class Beadles, kanina nakita na ko naabot og 99 round out. Oh my God. Bye-bye, guys.